We've heard recently this idea that Tower Hamlets is a no-go zone.
So some people say Limehouse is a no-go zone.
People say, do you feel safe?
There was something that someone said a few months ago, wasn't there, about no-go areas?
The media present this community as some sort of irrational, hateful contingent which just exists as like a fifth column.
The idea of communities that are living unintegrated within East London is something that does go back a very long way.
I suppose it's an inconvenience to them that such a powerful community presence exists just a stone's throw away from the City of London. We have these voices in authority talking about or trying to paint us as criminals or as intolerant or what have you. It's a sort of microcosm of the problem.
People can have anxieties whenever they hear of disorder. But hey, we live in a broken world, and on a global scale, living in London, living in Tower Hamlets is remarkably orderly and remarkably peaceful.
I mean, that notion of the no-go zone goes back right to the 19th century, when investigators were saying things like, oh, these are places where the police can't go. They only will go in groups because they're so afraid. It's always been true that the East End is much more written about than known about. There have always been particular images associated with it by those who don't know it well, who don't live here, who don't work here, but who need it to represent something, who need it to be a symbol of something.
It seems that, for instance, the particular focus on Tower Hamlets as a place of intolerance has in it an underlying racism or an underlying Islamophobia, being it that this is a place heavily dominated by the South Asian community, and there's a large Muslim community.
Going back to the early 80s, 90s, Limehouse obviously was a very different place. We had lots of issues with racism at the time when the first communities moved in the early 80s. I remember my brother telling me stories around when they go into school, they had fights with, people who are obviously not the same likings, and it wasn't once, it was regular fightings and so on and so forth. And they would tell us that, don't go this way, stay here. And it was quite frightening at the time as a young grown up, but I don't even tell them stories to my sons. Limehouse is such a nice place to live now. Thank God. It's very vibrant, popular, and we've got lots of different communities, residents, people who are just here for professionals and they're staying for a year and they feel part of it.
I'd say a lot of people live here because they work in the large corporate sectors. And again, what's nice here is it's an escape from that busy life, because we're here, you wouldn't think you're in 2 stops from the city on the DLR.
I've lived here nearly 20 years. I used to work for St Peter's Barge, just down at West India Quay, and that was a daughter congregation originally from St Anne's. The thing that we love about this area is that there's a complete diversity of people. So traditionally, of course, it's a very working class area with the old docks and everything else. Gentrification with Canary Wharf and development of the marina over recent decades has meant that we've got a complete mix of some of the wealthiest people in London and in the country, and still very high levels of childhood deprivation in Tower Hamlets, and a real mix of everything in between. And that's been reflected in this church. When I started about 10 years ago, I was concerned that it was in danger of tipping over into being a middle-class church, and I didn't want that. And it's really important for the whole church to see that you don't have to look and sound like me as a white, middle-class man, middle-aged, in order to be a man of God in the church.
We've known St Anne's for a very, very, very long time. We live locally, and so community is very important to us. And as you can see this morning when you came in, the atmosphere and everything about church is what community is all about.
I was born in Wapping in 1937. We had a very big Chinese community in Limehouse. And in Tower Hamlets itself, we had the Jewish people coming in. We've had the Irish community coming in. We've had the Muslim country coming in. So Tower Hamlets had so many different cultures and different nationalities coming in. You know, it's absolutely marvellous to think that all these things are happened here. It's an enrichment.
It's always been an area of immigrants who have built lives and established communities, established infrastructures all around the east of London. Probably the biggest migrant group to settle here initially was the Irish, who came in the 1840s, fleeing the famine, absolute destitution, who came and lived in Whitechapel, working on roads, working in the docks, working in the markets. And the next big wave of migrants was the Jewish immigrants coming from Eastern Europe, also fleeing destitution and political persecution, religious persecution. And they'd settled there initially because Jews were not allowed to trade in the City of London, so they had to actually establish their businesses outside of the City of London. Starting in the 60s and really accelerating in the 70s, Bengali and Bangladeshi immigrants coming to the same areas of East London, often working in the same sorts of trades.
Limehouse Masjid is one of the first local masjids to be built in Tower Hamlet, away from obviously East London Mosque, which is the biggest mosque. My first memories of the mosque is when I was, in the early youth, around the 10-12 age, when the mosque was huge excitement for us because it was something that we've been looking forward to, the elders have been talking about, we've been fundraising for it, and to see it finally here, it was a future excitement for us. The mosque is based in 3 arches under the Docklands Railway. You've probably heard it a few times. When people come, they think, how do you pray here? But when you come here and you sat down, it becomes immune. You get taken back in the surroundings of the mosque, how peaceful and tranquil it is, and that's just the background noise.
Perhaps the most notorious and exotic immigrant community in the 19th century and early 20th century was the Chinese community in Limehouse, which was actually a tiny community, only a few hundred people, but had enormous cultural importance. It represented what people did not understand and feared about the changes coming as a result of the British Empire. This is a time when Britain is, the apex of the British Empire has passed, and Britons are really afraid of losing their global supremacy, and the presence of the Chinese in Limehouse is kind of a focus for all of those anxieties.
This is really like the curse of empire. The people or the communities which this country spent so many decades destabilizing and running to the ground their institutions and their communities in order to further their opportunities have come to the imperial court, and the metaphorical chickens have come home to roost. Now there are homegrown British citizens who are questioning the issues that have for so long been swept under the rug about, settler colonialism and violent racism. I mean, you could even take this university that we're standing at as an example. It prides itself in that it's one of the most diverse Russell Group universities in London. A large percentage of this campus are people who have some cultural, theological, or otherwise connection to the Palestinian struggle, religious, or just a general human rights care for the issue. When it comes to those matters, the powers that be are quick to go towards harsh characterizations of people they've not been willing to sit down to have a discussion with.
Us being based in the East End of London means that we are close to the Tower Hamlets community. They understand injustice and have a history of being pro-protest, pro-Palestine, especially because the demographic is quite South Asian, it's like a lot of minority ethnic background, and more than that, they have been involved in this pro-Palestine stance for decades now.
I don't think there's a problem with anti-Semitism in Tower Hamlets. I think that people who say that don't know Tower Hamlets. My family were Jewish immigrants who immigrated to this area in the early 20th century, had their first shop here in Mile End. Anti-Semitism was a huge problem in the 1930s in the area, when there was a growing fascist party that intimidated Jewish shop owners, smashed their windows, organised marches through the areas of their residence, tried to make Jewish immigrants feel not welcome. That's anti-Semitism. But what I see now is concern for those dying abroad, and that's not so different from the ways in which Jews in the late 19th century were trying to mobilise the general public to care about other Jews who were being murdered in Russia at the time. So those ties that people have to other communities abroad do motivate the political sympathies of people here, and this is an area in which people have many ties to communities abroad.
We'll come together to support not just local community but humanity as a whole, whether it's here in the UK or abroad, and I think that's one of our duties to do that. Our students that study here in the evenings, we were trying to instill that in them as well, as they have a duty to local people, local community. Recently with the floods in Bangladesh, in Sylhet, local residents came for prayer and they donated close to £2,000. Previous to that, we've worked with our residents to raise money for the victims of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria.
I would say that, in life in general, vulnerable people are ignored, and the church does a lot of things in terms of programs that engage local people as well.
We do what we call night shelter. We get different people from different countries coming in. They come in where they're not sure if they're going to be sent back or not. They come into the church, we welcome them, and we try to help them and guide them. I think that's what church is about. And through that comes great love for one another. And that's what I believe in, great love for my fellow citizens, my church family, my own family. If we don't show that love to other people, then we won't get love back. It's only you share your life. I love talking to people. I love hearing what they've got to say, and being quite up. And it's when you hear some of the stories, you think to yourself, how do they manage to handle that? Sometimes we hide behind things because we don't want to hear what's going on, where we should be. Great Britain's always been immigration. We was all probably, if we go back 100 years in our lives, probably we might come from a different part of the world. What I call, as a Cockney, we hug people. Like when we greet people, even friends or that, we go hug.
We've had one person who was seeking asylum who joined our church council for a short time before, sadly, the Home Office relocated them to Newcastle overnight. So it's a very unstable situation to be in. We've had others who have now gained asylum status and are living in Tower Hamlets with their families. I've baptised some of them, but they will be people that we've got to know as people rather than as a kind of category to be afraid of. When I read the Bible, I see the kind of mixture of people from all nations, all languages, united together.
We work very closely with St Anne's Church and Reverend Richard. Whether it's programmes or community issues, we have them dialogues with Reverend Richard and see where we can come as a community to come together to tackle some of that. Because again, we don't want to be an elephant in the area and people, they just walk past us. We want people to come in and say hello. We want to go say hello to people, to be part of that. And I think the church does it, the mosque does it well, and everyone appreciates that in Limehouse because they know when they can go for the help and support. And we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome here, whether you're of the Muslim faith or non-Muslim faith.
Now, when I started 10 years ago, I was advised by members of that community, look, if you go to the local mosque, very likely the elders of the mosque, the uncles they call them, may not even speak English, and it's very much run on Bangladeshi village kind of lines. Over the last few years, a younger generation who grew up in Limehouse have taken over, and so they've invited me to events at the mosque. I've invited them back to St Anne's, and we have a good working relationship, and we have had some discussions about the beliefs that we share and where we differ.
The idea that the East End was sort of sustaining some, ties between people that were warm, that were supportive, that enabled communities to flourish and to continue to sort of transmit their traditions to their children. This was something that was always perceived as being located in the East End. So I think there's ways in which all of those things that were often seen as perhaps threatening, other, different, were also seen as the source of a lot of positive values as well.
It's just that sense of community. Everyone's looking out for each other.
We have residents that come here, obviously, tenants and visitors. We have professionals that come from Canary Wharf and from the city. From the city, normally people that get the DLR in, and from Canary Wharf it's a walk, and they're catered for. So the mosque has gone with the times, we've developed, and it's part of the community here. We've had a huge influx of worshippers here. Some prayers we're praying outside, the free halls are not enough. Yes, you know, the communities have changed, the area's regenerated. We've just literally had a new hotel built across the road. You know, if you look at the rental market, it speaks for itself.
Intergenerational families are absolutely dependent on availability of housing. So where housing becomes too expensive, it's impossible for those communities to survive in that same form. So that's what we're really seeing in East London. I mean, we're seeing it in lots of other areas of London as well. Those networks that are built up over generations are really valuable, and it's difficult to know actually what will happen to them.
Prices have obviously increased in the area quite dramatically, yeah, especially for the people who bought, you know, 20, 30 years ago when they were built. They've made a nice profit. But the rental yields at the moment aren't stacking up, which is why investors aren't coming to play. There's a lot of first-time buyers in the area, so a lot of them people would have rented in the area when they would have first come and got their jobs up in London in the financial sector, Canary Wharf, or you know, in the city, because of the transport links here are so good. What we tend to see is people rent in the area, they then buy as first-time buyers. They'll then meet someone, buy a bigger property, have a baby, and then tend to move out of the area after that.
The aspiration for immigrants in the early 20th century was to get to the suburbs as quickly as possible. I think that the opposite is true today. People living in the East End now, they would much rather stay if it were possible. It's now cheaper to move out to a suburb, so those things have reversed.
What you'll see, not just in Limehouse, but you know, all around Docklands area, is where there's water, it's now built up. We get a lot of people asking for, you know, a river view, a marina view. You know, developers have come in, seen the attraction, and have built around them areas. And I do believe in the land that there's still left to be built on, there will be affordable housing, because people still need somewhere to live. And again, we need people from all different areas, all different countries, all different aspects of life to join our community, especially in Canary Wharf. There is rumours, should we call it, of companies not using the office space as much since COVID, people working from home. So in my opinion, I can see Canary Wharf within the next 5 to 10 years being, a lot more residential buildings than it be office blocks.
Actually, over the past 10 years, our congregation has grown. It's doubled in size, more than doubled. We have greater diversity of ages as well as of backgrounds and classes and so on. Yes, there's a question about the cost of housing around here. Some of the families who are members of our church, some of the individuals have felt let down and they haven't got the housing that they really need. We help and do what we can in advocacy. It's easy to think that it's someone else's problem to fix. And actually it's a societal problem, and if we are all involved in doing what we can, then it really helps those situations.
I love the congregation, the mixture of congregation, young and old, from all different parts of the world, where they might be being persecuted, and there's a great love for one another as brothers and sisters here. We can come here and feel at total peace with each other. Me and my wife, we love living here. My children were brought up down here. But someone said, would you ever move? I said, no.
Just the other night, we had a family that came from Egypt and they're staying at the hotel, and he Googled and he found the mosque. He wanted to come and pray here. So we were having a discussion and said, I was just asking him, compared to when you're in Egypt, how do you find it? And he said, look, it's lovely. I'm looking for a place to stay around here now. So you would see just from that comment that it's a welcoming place, and anyone that would say or is saying that Limehouse is not a place to come or is a no-go zone, come and visit and you'll see the difference.